Awesome.
There we
Thank you.
go.
Cool. Yeah, welcome to the weekly analytics call. I think we only have one FYI item today. And the next agenda item is I'm going to hand over to John Mason for walking the board. Just maybe one thing I wanted to point out, there's one item on the at-risk list that was added to the list today. It's the filter control for value stream analytics. So Ezekiel is currently splitting up his big merge request into smaller chunks that can be reviewed individually. So I talked to him earlier this morning, and he's confident that most of the MRs will get merged this week. So we might miss the deadline by a few days, but we don't expect too much of a carryover for the next milestone. So we will be able to enable the feature flag most likely beginning of next week on production.
Awesome. Thanks for the update.
Over to John Mason.
Actually, sorry, I should have given an update about this. Jeremy was actually recommending that the EMs walk the board and then the PMs kind of take the next up section to talk about what's in the future. So I was thinking maybe we could try that. I thought that was a good idea.
Sure. Let me open the board real quick and I'll share my screen.
Don't mean to put you on the spot here, Martin. Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay. Cool. So hope you can see my screen. Yeah, so as far as P1s goes, there's only one item. This is the filter results that I just mentioned that it's will be most likely be finished this week. So it's at risk, but we don't expect too much of a carryover for this one. On the P2 column, we only have the North Star metrics issue. Maybe then you can give a quick update on this one. Do you think it's at risk or?
Actually, I see Magda's on the call.
Oh, awesome.
Hi. So it's in, okay, so the part about the usage ping is in the maintainer review. I actually started work on the usage ping and I'm thinking now to add it to the current MAR because it's not going to be many files. When is the deadline?
So I guess it depends. So there was a note earlier this morning that I think whatever was in the master until yesterday or early this morning is guaranteed to be put in the next release candidate. I'm not 100% sure about what's coming after. So there might be another release candidate, but that's not guaranteed yet. But please correct me if I'm wrong, Dan. Or
I thought the 17th was the guaranteed date, but then you could sort of fudge it. You know, you could probably get things in a few days after that. But I could be wrong.
Yes, actually, you are right. Yes, I think we should have at least one more day.
Okay, well, it might work out till tomorrow.
Cool.
I think we could probably say that practically speaking, the end of this week is the last possible day you could get things in because 22nd is the release date, which is, I think, Monday. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sounds reasonable. Cool. I see there's nothing on the P3 and P4 column. So we have one item that is workflow blocked. I think Michael was working on that one. It's the optimized page loading on the Insights Analytics. I think there was a little bit of discussion between you and Nick regarding the UX, as far as I remember.
Yeah, so essentially the functionality is merged, and there's right now just a different loader than the ticket specified. I missed that when I started implementing it, but I think it was kind of fortunate because that meant that it accidentally was broken up into iterative states, and I was not blocked on this decision on what the loader would look like. I'm currently working on a follow-up follow-up MR to specify the loader, or like to create the loader, which is currently a task that's blocking this from further development. So I just picked up that task from, I can't remember, whoever was assigned to that. Get it merged into the general GitLab UI and or pajamas, and then pull it into GitLab and use.
Is that issue on the board somewhere?
It is not. I might need to change some labels on it. I can share it in the chat here. Is that a good way of going about it? And somebody could help me out.
I think the only thing we would need to do is to add the milestone in order to have it on the board.
Okay, we'll go and do that right now.
Cool, awesome. So if I understand correctly, we might be able to close this one, but we will have a follow-up issue for the replacement of the skeleton loader. Okay.
That's correct.
Cool. Awesome, cool. So other than that, there's one more which is ready for development. I'm not sure if we will get to this one. It doesn't have a priority label assigned, so it's a backstage technical debt refactoring task. Not sure if Pavel had time to look into this, but we'll probably have to carry it over, but maybe Dan has more knowledge about this one.
Yeah, we popped that in as a stretch goal, and actually, I don't know if we put the stretch label on there. We didn't, but yeah, that was a stretch goal. I don't know if Pavel will have time to get this in 13.1 or not. But it's just some refactoring, not too big a deal.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the other one is the P1 which is currently in dev, and other than that, I think that's it from the board.
I like follow up on that ticket. It actually belongs to a different group, and I'm just picking it up from them. So I don't know if I should change those labels. I probably shouldn't, because it's part of a bigger, I'm not sure it's an epic, but a bigger task that they're working on. So I'll probably just keep the labels that's on there and just change the milestone to 13.2.
That should work. We probably won't see it in the board because the board is filtered by our group, but that doesn't matter. I guess if it belongs to a different group, just make sure that the milestone label is set correctly. Cool.
And Mike, one weird detail there, when you execute it on the merge request, put analytics group, the group analytics label, because this stuff gets counted at the top level to see, which groups are doing how much. So that's just like a weird nuance, but leave the group label that's on the issue.
Thank you for explaining. That makes sense.
Okay, so the next agenda item is going through next up issues. So handing over to John Mason now.
Thanks very much. So thanks again for everybody who contributed already in line on the agenda here. So the first item to talk about is the analytics charts being embedded in handbook pages. And one of the open questions we have is related to whether we need a separate back-end issue or not. The the backend requested is looks described here. So Adam took a look and described that what we want is a separate page for a chart with the DOM layout, no header, menus, and so on, that would render an empty page div or placeholder, and the front end would render the chart. So the question is this something we want to do with the front end team, or do we want the back end team to do it? And
So
yes.
I guess we can, either way, we can create a separate issue backend because work on this separately since we need the page anyhow. So maybe Ezekiel will be able to pick up this part. If not, we would just have to switch labels on it, but creating a separate issue for it would make sense in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. That makes sense to create two separate labels. It doesn't seem to, without knowing the full details behind it, it doesn't seem too big of a change. I'm happy to also help out with that if I can.
Awesome, thank you. Follow-up question then would be, what do we need to do? What are kind of the outstanding questions that we would need to put an estimate on that, either the front end or the back end part? It looks like it's been discussed pretty well. I didn't see any open questions, but wanted to ask, what else do we have to figure out in order to be able to estimate?
Yeah, I think it seems fairly scoped out. It's probably, like, again, following up on, like, having a separate ticket will probably make it easier to estimate it. I guess for me, but I might also just be unaware. The part about handling permissions, at least for the first stage, seems like that we need to decide whether we're going to always show all the data, or we're always going to show the public data, and we need to kind of make a decision on that. I'm not sure if that was answered. Maybe I missed it.
I think what I had proposed was that we leave it as is. In other words, today Insights differentiates. We would leave it in that state, so as to minimize the amount of work. And then as we get feedback that says, hey, it's confusing, whether I'm logged in or not logged in, I see different things on the chart, we can then address to make that consistent, so that we're always showing the same set of data.
Gotcha. I am a little bit concerned around that, because that confusion on the user side might end up showing that we need to implement certain things, but I need to dig a little bit further in order to understand that completely. But I do see some risk in just letting the data decide it. Might make it more complex on the front end side. I can't exactly tell you if that's going to have an impact before I dig into it, but it might have, and that I think that might make it more complex, but unsure of that.
Just a note from backend point of view. I'm not so generally to have this feature ready. I don't see too much complexity, but at this point we don't really have a chart to put in there. And I guess that's the critical part where you have to actually connect with the existing chart from the report pages feature and actually present the chart in an embedded way. There could be some issues there.
Right. So I also suggested that we should wait for the generic reports page before we can actually work on the embeddable feature for the handbook. And I think John Mason suggested that we could start with insights. My only concern is if we were to start with insights and we create a dedicated, like a sibling page, like Michael and Adam suggested, then we would have to create a sibling page for insights. And then when we move to the generic reports page, we would have to do the same work for the generic reports page again, because it's like located under a separate route. But maybe that's maybe I have misunderstood. But I think if we start with insights, we might end up doing things at least twice, because we would have to create the siblings page for insights and then for the generic reports page again.
It doesn't seem to me like that would be too much work, but Adam, maybe you have a little bit more experience on that side of things than I do.
You mean to have insights there?
Like how much work it would be to create that separate page first for insight, and then later on for the generic page that we're yet to build.
Yeah, I don't see too much work for that, because most of the stuff is built on the front end side, right? So figuring out how do we render an empty page that we can actually embed shouldn't be too difficult, as far as I can tell. I mean, we don't need the header, we don't need the layout, basically. So
we don't need a separate header for it to be able to embed?
I mean, header like what we have now on the website, the GitLab header with the
sorry.
So we'll need
okay, gotcha.
So we'll need the HTML structure and everything.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We're on the same page.
I don't know if
no
the front end.
No top navigation.
Actually, I don't know if the front end actually cuts or splits the JavaScript bundles, so we don't have to include the whole, GitLab JS, but just what we actually need. I don't know if that's possible, but it's not something that we have to focus on the first iteration.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think we always. So I think our main JS is included on pretty much all pages. So even on a blank page, we would we would include the main JS. But we probably need to do some digging around this. I'm not entirely sure. But I guess for a first iteration, even if it's not optimized for performance and load time, I think this can be part of a follow-up issue if we feel like it's that we're loading too big of a bundle or too many assets. So you both feel that we can start with insights, then let's follow John Mason's proposal and go with that.
Yeah, I think it doesn't sound like it would be too much, and I think actually depending on the priority on this, I'm a little bit unsure of, but it seems like it would de-risk a little bit, because that would mean that we could start playing around with what that embedded page would look like. And if it turns out that we get to a point where, well, I wouldn't expect that, but perhaps we're so far ahead with the generic page that we can actually shift gears and start to implement it there instead, then that would be fine, because I do think that there's probably a few things that we would need to test out for it to work properly. I think the positive thing is that we already have an example of a chart being embedded, so we can pretty much lean on that. So don't see too much risk in this.
Yeah, just one thing. So the insights feature, you can actually, for a specific report, you can specify more than one chart. So I don't know how the front end will handle this. Will it render both charts or just one? I mean, from users' point of view, if they define only one chart, then it should be fine. But if they have two charts, we present both of them, or we have to filter them out somehow.
I would
Not sure.
expect this page to only show one chart, and then you would have to embed them individually. I think that's by far the simplest way of going about this. But without knowing the exact structure of the page, I think that should be possible. But that's a good point too.
Yeah.
Something to look out for.
Yeah, we need to see a way if we can actually reference a particular chart, because as I said, it's an array. And I'm not sure we have an ID there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would need to look more into that in order to be able to answer something like that. I'm getting to the point where my knowledge we're very much at the fringe.
Yeah, the only thing I can, the only thing I can see is the title. So that could be a way to filter. Chart title.
Okay. And the chart title, is that localized, or is that hard coded in the YAML file?
It's user specified, so you can write anything there.
Okay. Yeah, since this is just I guess if we can start with that, since this is just the first iteration, and eventually we will move from insights to the generic reports page anyway. I guess we can look into filtering by chart title, and if that doesn't work, we need to define a separate attribute that we can filter on, or maybe just the index of the chart array or whatever.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. Thanks very much. So if we talked about, so have I captured everything that we talked about just now? The JS bundle, starting with insights.
Maybe just a separate issue for the backend part.
Separate issue for the backend.
Or for the backend, not necessarily, but just for the empty page. Yeah.
And then, Michael, you had a question related to permissions on this, and my point was that Insights already has a way of handling permissions, and the intent with the story is not to change it. Not in other words, we're not going to introduce any new complexity or rules or anything in the first iteration, to just keep it simple as possible.
Sorry to jump in here. The reason why I'm asking this is I've done something similar before, and we made the same call on the data, just let it display whatever, and it ended up in our situation it was embedding a video stream, and we ended up needing to work a way around some permissions issues. And while I can't foresee what that would look like in the chart instance here, I am just aware that there might be a risk that that might not just work out as we expect it to. Just talking from, I had a similar experience here with trying to embed something else, and it didn't turn out the way that we wanted it. And in this way, it might not be the case here, but I'm just saying that there might be a risk that we figure out that the way that the permissions work this way around wouldn't necessarily work the way that we think, or provide the user experience the way that we think. It's kind of hard to express because I don't know what that would look like, but just noting that there might be a risk there, I think.
Yeah, thanks.
I guess the main risk would, I think the main risk would be that we create a link for the embed or embedded iframe, which is displaying a chart of a private project, for example. Is that what you are concerned about?
I am concerned about the experience being different from what you expect. So let's say the user that's creating this chart is wanting to share the data and shares it with a user who doesn't have permission to view the same data, and sends a link, and then the user on the other side sees something completely different, and that is a very confusing experience. And that's something that I know that we already noted down, but practically the situation that I had with the video stream, how we thought this would work out actually ended up not working out. It ended up not being able to be flexible enough to work for all the user experiences that we saw. So sharing it ended up not being possible in one way, I think I remember. And then I'm trying to map it to this other situation that I had an experience with where we ended up needing to actually enforce that certain permissions were met before we could share it. So I'm just noting that there might be a risk here that we end up in a situation where the experience doesn't actually work, and we do need to enforce certain permissions.
Right. So I guess since we're rendering an entire page, and we probably, I'm assuming that the controller would take care of the checking the permissions. So I guess we could run into an issue where we embed the chart and the user on the other end doesn't have the right permissions, and then he would probably get redirected to the login screen or whatever, or see like an error message. Yeah, and this would like be weird, like having an iframe and then being redirected in that iframe to the login screen for GitLab. So yeah.
Something like that, just like something that would end up breaking the user experience might be a risk here. I'm not saying that would happen, and it's actually very hard for me to visualize what actually will happen because I have a limited view of how this works. So I'm just like noting what I see as a potential risk.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess we don't have to be too concerned about this in the first iteration, since the main usage will be the handbook, and I'm expecting that we will only embed charts from the public GitLab project. So I'm hoping, I'm expecting this not to be too much of an issue for the first iteration, but if we move forward and we're going to allow users to embed charts in other places, then that's definitely something that we need to consider.
I think you're coming up with a good point there. What we could do for first iteration is maybe not turn it on for private until we've tested it out, the experience completely. That could be a stepping stone, and just like add it as a feature flag or something.
That sounds good. Sounds really good.
So, yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a fantastic solution.
John Mason, the first couple of charts are group level, yeah? For issues and merge requests?
Yes, they are. Well, yes, in report pages, that is true. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so group level, not project level. So does that mean that in this first iteration, we should do something to exclude private projects within the group? Or should, I guess that would be our only option for GitLab, because I think we have some private projects. I could go confirm that. Just curious what your thought is on that.
We could do that. That would give us a level of safety. Because in our first iteration, our primary audience is just internal playing with it, and we know it's not even when we finish it, it's not going to be fully ready to start embedding in in the handbook, because there are some other things that the both of those teams need in those charts in order for them to really realize the value. But if we can give them something they can play with, you know, so they can put it on a page somewhere that's not public and they can get to kind of, you know, kick the tires on it, they're going to be happy to start seeing how that would work. So like if we leave some rough edges, I think that's okay, because we're going to be coming back to do some other work in this area anyway. If we're really concerned about it and we think it's, you know, small enough to fit in our MVC, fine. I'm not opposed to that either.
Yeah, and I feel like what we're talking about now is aggregated data. It's kind of the same thing with like personal health data. As long as it's aggregated, it's okay to share with people, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, it's de-identified data that we're talking about here. So I think it's probably okay even if we do include private projects, you know, data from private projects, like total issues across the whole group, total MRs across the whole group.
Wait, that's not okay. No, cannot. They can figure out, you know, how many issues you have in private projects. So we already had a few security issues about that. But generally our current finders actually take into account that do you have permission to visit that particular project. So if it's private, you won't see it in Insights, even if you logged in and if you are part of GitLab.org group.
So then we do need to hide private projects, or we need to basically say for this blank page that only renders the chart, we need to sort of assume that it's a user with the lowest possible permissions, maybe.
Yeah, for the query you can give permission ID, or what is it, access level. So only show you the guest accessible items, and that will also take care of the filtering.
Anybody have any objection to that?
Well, I would just say, you know, if we're talking about whether we render the embed or not, or just a message that says you can't see this chart because it's a private project or something like that, when we're talking about not group level, but just private project level, then I would say handling rough edges like that makes sense to do at this point. But what I don't think we want to do is mess with the logic that Insights is already using and is already in production around what we show and don't show in an aggregation in this first iteration. That seems to me to be taking on more scope than we need to. Insights, whatever it's doing today, is already in production. So if there are any concerns about it, you know, that seems to me to be a separate question.
Yeah, Insights already take care of this, so it's already filtered.
So I'm not sure that it is a separate question, because with Insights, you're logged in, you're authenticated. In the handbook, you know, that's actually a totally separate web application. You know, it's a separate thing that we're assuming unauthenticated, you know, people who might not even be part of GitLab would be looking at those charts.
Now, Insights today supports unauthenticated use for public projects.
Right, for public projects, and we're talking about a public group that contains some private projects.
That will be also filtered. So the query behind Insights will check your current user, and if you are not logged in or you don't have permission, you're simply not getting those counts for the private projects.
Yeah.
So I think the point is just that we need to do this little bit of work now to use like guest user across all use cases. Like anybody looking at an embedded chart is going to see the guest perspective on it. So it'll be consistent, but it might not be what they see when they look at the same chart in, you know, on the generic report page.
I like that way of going about it because it's gonna de-risk a lot of things for us. It might be a little bit of work now, but we're gonna know that we're gonna have a consistent experience. You could see it the other way around would be that if we allowed it now, we would have to implement testing to make sure that we test out all these different permissions that we could come up with. And that's a complex matrix because you have a sender and a receiver. So I like taking the weakest link approach.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is way more predictable. And we don't have to deal with any sort of edge cases, and more like a closed system that we are dealing with.
I totally agree that that is a great step to take. Totally agree. The question I still have is I'm not sure I understand why that is necessary in the first step, because I'm still not seeing the scenario that Dan described as different from what Insights already handles today. Adam made some remark about that, but I didn't understand it or missed it.
So the current feature of Insights, if you are logged in or logged out, the same query will be executed. The only difference is that we will check your user when you are logged in. And of course, if you have access to those particular projects that are private, you will also see the results from those projects. But if you are logged out, you won't. So in Insights, the feature itself is already safe. And I think it could be just embedded as a, we can just embed it as it is without modifying. Of course, there is still the issue of I'm logged in, I see different counts than a logged out user, but that's, I think, another discussion.
So that was the same understanding that I had about it, is that Insights already handled that case safely. And so I just wondered why do that extra iteration? I totally agree we want to land in the place where the result is consistent. It just seems to be like we could actually handle that in a follow-up. If you think it doesn't make any difference to the size, that really it's the same size, and there's some reason why it would be the same size, fine.
It does.
In
It
the
does
spirit,
make
in the spirit of kind of
difference to
thinning
the
things
size.
down.
Sorry about that. It does make a little bit of a difference to the size. One way of going about it is to take the weakest link approach. The other way of going about it is to only allow public charts to be published and embedded. Those are, I think, kind of the two options that we're looking at. I know we're coming to a close now.
Yeah, I think we're at time already. Should we just follow up on the discussion in the issue?
All right, thank you very much. It was a good conversation. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Everybody,
Talk
bye.
soon. Bye.